Hey everyone, so it's been a while since I made a video. It's been about a year or a little over a year since my last video, and I really didn't have much to talk about until now, so what better time to make a video than right now? So this video is going to be for anyone who's been a caregiver for a friend or a family member or just caretakers in general. Um, so I was a caregiver for my grandmother. And so I'm just going to tell my story, and probably towards the end of the video, I'm going to have some lessons that I learned throughout my journey of being a caregiver. And hopefully, people who are going to be put in the position of being a caregiver or who are already in the position and are kind of new at it, whatever, can watch this and hopefully get some kind of help out of it. Um, so my story started back in 2014. Um, I was graduating high school and I talked to my dad and I told him that I would like to move in with my grandmother after I graduate because, first of all, I did not have a job or money to move out on my own, and it's very expensive. Secondly, my grandmother lived by herself. My grandfather passed away a year before I graduated. And a few years prior to my high school graduation, my grandmother was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so my dad and I talked about it, and we knew that she was going to be getting sicker. It was going to get worse. And seeing as she lived alone, we thought it would be a good idea if I moved in with her. So he agreed, and after about a month after my graduation, I moved in. And things were fine for the first year. I helped her with things that she couldn't do, like mowing the lawn. When I first moved in, I want to mention this. When I first moved in with her, she was still able-bodied. She was still doing things like cleaning the house. She was still cooking. She was very much still active. So the first year, I want to say the first year, year and a half, there was no problems. I did get a job, so I was trying to help her financially, give her a little bit of money here and there from my paychecks. Um, I helped her with the grocery shopping, going and doing things that she couldn't do, like taking her to the bank and just little things like that, and working obviously. Through this time, I went to online school for medical billing and coding. And things were perfectly fine. Um, and then things were fine for about the first 2 years. Um, then in 2017, it was May of 2017, it was Mother's Day weekend. That Friday, both her and I had been sick. Now, I had been sick with a sinus infection. I get frequent sinus infections, and I was on antibiotics. But I thought she had caught a cold. I thought maybe I had brought it home from work or something, and she just caught it, and she got really sick. And I felt horrible because, like I said, I thought I brought it home to her. So, like I said, at first I thought it was a cold. Tried to take care of her the best I could. So Friday passes, and that Friday night, she sleeps on the couch because she could not breathe. She was having a really, really hard time breathing. So Friday night passes, Saturday night passes, Sunday morning at 9 o'clock at night, or 9 o'clock in the morning. So Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, my grandmother comes in my room and she wakes me up and she says, Kelly, you need to get me some help. I can't breathe. And I could tell she was distressed. And my grandmother was not the kind of woman to complain or, there have been times where she has had walking pneumonia when she was younger, and she still went to work and took care of her family. And so she's not the kind of woman to complain unless she is seriously, seriously ill. So I jumped out of bed. I called my dad. He was the first person I called. And I said, Dad, Grandma's really sick. We need to get a nurse here. So he said to call the nurse. Now, I forgot to mention this earlier in the video. My grandma was a part of a program. I think they called it palliative care, which isn't quite hospice, but it is when someone is sick. So what she had was basically there was a nurse that would come out. When it started, it was the nurse was coming out every, I believe, 2 weeks. I think my grandma wanted it like once a month. But then my grandma got to the point where she said, okay, once a week is fine. So we had a nurse come out once a week. And then also, what this program did was it would deliver her medications to our house. So I wouldn't have to go to the pharmacy to get her medicine, which was great for me because there are a lot of restrictions on her medication, which I completely understand. But she was on very strong medications like morphine at a certain point and oxycodone. At the time, she was on oxycodone. So, in order to get her prescription for oxycodone, I had to go down to her doctor's office, show my ID. They had to print out a little prescription sheet. I had to sign it. They had to make a copy, give it to me. I had to take it to the pharmacy, drop it off at the pharmacy. They had to fill it. They had to check my ID there again. And it was just a real pain in the butt. So, anyway, so this palliative care program was great. But that Sunday that I called, they said that they could not send anyone out because it was a Sunday and their nurses typically don't work on Sundays. So I call my dad and I say, Dad, they say they can't send anyone out and we need to get someone out right now. So he says, okay, I'll handle it. I'll call. So he calls and he tells them how sick my grandma is and that we need someone out right away. So they say the only way we can get someone out on a Sunday like that was if we put her in hospice. So my dad says, that's fine, do whatever you have to do, we just need to get someone out here. So they put her on hospice, they enrolled her in the program that same exact day. Not even an hour later, we had a nurse show up to the house. So my dad came and then we had the nurse show up, and right away when the nurse got there, she was checking my grandma's vitals, she was putting in an order for antibiotics, she was checking my grandmother's other medications, she was putting in an order for an oxygen machine, for a nebulizer, for an inhaler. She was amazing. She was so amazing. That's the only way I can describe her. And from the moment she stepped in the door, it was about helping my grandma. And we were worried there for a while because she was really having problems breathing. And it was brought up by the nurse to me, since I was her caregiver, that she might be better off going to the in-care hospice center, which is a hospice center where most of the time people go to die, or sick elderly people go to recuperate. And I asked her about it, but she said she didn't want to go. She said she wasn't that horribly sick and she was starting to feel better since the nurse had the medication come that same day and they administered the medication, so she was feeling a bit better, having a bit easier time breathing. So I said, okay, all right. So after that incident, she got better, and again, things were fine for a few months. Her mind was slipping a little bit, but not too horribly noticeable. She was still filling out her checkbooks, paying her bills, she was still cooking, she was still, doing her everyday things. So nothing really to worry about. But then in October, things just went straight to hell. My dad and I have been talking about going on vacation for a really long time. I have never been on a vacation. I don't think he's ever been on a vacation either. And we've been talking about it since I was about 10. More like 5 or 6. But we had been talking about going on a vacation for a long, long time, since I was little. And so we decided we were going to go on a week-long vacation. We were going to go on a road trip up to the mountains and just kind of see Colorado, because I've never really seen any parts of Colorado. I've never really been up to the mountains or anything like that, and my dad wanted to take me. So we made the plans. We had a family member come out to stay with my grandma while we were gone. And everything was set. I wrote down a whole entire long list of how to administer my grandmother's medications, what she was on. I wrote down the hospice number. I wrote down the nurse's name, everything. And my dad and I packed our stuff and we left. And we were gone, I believe it was 2 days and 3 nights. It was over a weekend, I believe. We left on a Thursday. No, we left on a Friday. We came back on a Saturday. No, we left on a Thursday. We came back on a Saturday. So we left on a Thursday. We came back on Saturday night. So Thursday, we left early in the morning on Thursday. And after we left, one of my grandmother's nurses came, but it wasn't her normal nurse that comes. And my grandmother had been complaining about pain in her chest, which is normal in patients that have lung cancer. But she was saying that the pain had been getting worse and the oxycodone and the morphine were just not helping anymore. So the next step that the nurse did was put her on fentanyl patches. Now the thing is that, and here's my problem with that whole situation. So the thing about that was, first of all, they did it when I was not there. I am her primary caregiver. I live with her. They knew that it was in notes with the hospice center that I was her caregiver. So they didn't ask me about it. They didn't call me about it. They had my number. And honestly, I think if there's a change in medication, they should call the primary caregiver, and let them know or ask them. So that was my first problem. Then the other problem was that when they put the fentanyl patch on my grandmother, they did not tell her to stop taking her morphine or her oxycodone. So she was taking all of these pain medications at one time, and it was kind of taking its toll on her. So we got a call from our family member that we had left her with on Friday night. Friday night we got the call, and they were saying that we needed to come home. And it wasn't just things going on with my grandmother that made us need to go home. There were some other family crises that were going on that we needed to get home to help with. So we came home early. We came home late Sunday night. And my grandmother looked fine. She just looked kind of tired, just really tired, worn out, which is understandable. It's completely understandable. So the next day, the family member left, and it was just me and my grandma again. And we were alone Sunday and Monday. So Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, it was just me and her. And Sunday and Monday, it was okay. Monday night was when she started throwing up. And my grandmother could not hold anything down. She could not even hold water down. She was throwing up. It was horrible. I was at first thinking maybe it was the flu or a stomach bug. I went to the grocery store. I got her Gatorade. And she couldn't even hold the Gatorade down. She couldn't hold food down. I couldn't get any kind of cohesive thoughts from her. I couldn't get her to respond to me. She was just not there. She just looked like she was in so much pain, and she was just so sick and so tired. And the nurse was supposed to come that Thursday because the nurses always came on Thursdays. And this was a Wednesday. She was laying on the couch on her side, couldn't hold anything down, had the bucket next to her, shaking. She was physically shaking. And I said, Grandma, I can't watch you like this anymore. I need to call your nurse. I need to call the hospice nurse. So I called up the hospice line and I said, she is throwing up. She can't hold anything down. She's in a lot of pain. I can't get her to respond to me. I can't get any coherent thoughts out of her. I don't know what to do. At this point, I don't know what to do. So they said, all right, well, we'll send a nurse out. So her normal nurse came out, and again, she is an amazing woman. She was so much help to me. She comes out and she takes one look at my grandma and says she needs to go to the in-hospice care center. So she made arrangements, and the awesome thing about the in-care hospice center that we went to is that they had non-emergency ambulances to do the transferring. So she arranged for a non-emergency ambulance to pick us up and take us to the center. and they made sure that there was a bed open for her. And then after all the arrangements were made to take her to the center, she administered medication. Obviously, they had to go through an alternate route as she couldn't hold anything down. So I held her hand and tried to keep her calm through the alternate administration of the medication, which she didn't even know what was going on. She was completely out of it. So the non-emergency ambulance came and picked us up. I packed our stuff. They came to pick us up, and they took us to the center. And the hospice that we used was the Denver hospice, and they were amazing people, so helpful. And so she was taken to the center on a Wednesday night. Now, the first night I stayed with her, and I cannot describe the emotional toll that it took on me. Now, my grandmother always wanted to die in her home. And I want to mention real quick that my grandmother was not afraid of death at all. She had been preparing herself for it, and she had been ready for it for years before she got sick, years before she was diagnosed with cancer. She was ready for it. She knew she was going to go, and she was okay with it. She was fine with it. And she had an amazing, strong faith in God. And she wanted to go home to him. And so, you know, she was ready for it, and she prepared all of us for it. But I was not prepared for it to be like this. So that first night, like I said, was so incredibly emotionally draining. She is this tiny, frail little old woman laying in this hospital bed. She has got tubes all over her. They had to put a tube in her stomach for medication because at the time she couldn't hold anything down. They had her on oxygen. They didn't even have, like, because I was staying the night with her, they didn't really have proper beds. They had a chair that folded out into a bed. It was not that comfortable, but, you know, I didn't care. But that first night, I laid on that little bed, and I was watching her, and my biggest fear was that she was going to die in that hospice center, because I knew in my mind that is not what she wanted. She did not want to die in that hospice center. She wanted to go home. And then the thought hit me that she might not be coming home at all. This could be her last night, or even the next day could be her last day, because she was just so sick. I did not expect her to make it, and that utterly broke me. So there was a TV in the room, and I spent a lot of time watching TV, and it really didn't hit me until about midnight, 1 in the morning, that she might not be coming home. And I just broke down crying. I broke down crying because for two and a half years up to that point, 2.5, 3 years, yeah, up to that point, it had been just me and her living together. And I couldn't imagine having to go home alone without her and start having to make funeral arrangements and her cremation arrangements. I just could not. I just didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to think about it. And I broke down crying, and my heart was just broken. And I just, like I said, I was thinking of having to walk out of that hospital center with her stuff in a bag and having to go home and take care of all of her stuff. And so I broke down and I started crying. And here's the awesome thing. So outside of the room, down the hallway, they had like a little family meeting center. They had like a kitchen with a fridge and a vending machine and a coffee machine, and you could get hot chocolate from it and whatever. And then they had this beautiful little waiting area, like a family meeting area if a patient had family, meeting and they wanted to sit and talk or whatever outside of a hospital room. So there was a really pretty couch, there were some chairs, there was an electrical fireplace, and then they had lamps. And it was really pretty. And I remember sitting on the couch in this little waiting room and just crying my eyes out and just praying to God to let her live a little bit longer so that she could come home, because I'd rather her die at home than have to die in this hospital center where she doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know who these nurses are. I didn't want her to spend her last night or her last days there, because that's not what she wanted. And I must have cried for 2-3 hours straight, 4 even. And then the night nurse that was taking care of my grandma, because they had a day nurse and a night nurse, and they would alternate. The night nurse was a wonderful, wonderful man. He noticed that I was sitting on the couch, utterly broken and crying and lonely, and he asked me if I was okay. And I told him that it just kind of all hit me at one time, that she might not be coming home, that this might be her final moment. And he had me stand up and he gave me the tightest hug. And he said, well, let's go take a look at her. And he walked me into her room and we watched her breathe for a few minutes. And he said, well, here's the thing with her breathing. When people are getting ready to die, they start having really shallow breaths, and they have this certain kind of, I can't think of the word, but but they start getting really shallow breaths, and then they'll stop breathing for a few seconds, and then they'll start breathing again. And I was trying to think of the disease where, or the condition where you stop breathing in your sleep and you have to wear the mask, and my brain is empty right now. But anyway, he said that it looked like she was getting ready to move on, so she literally had one foot in the grave and one foot in the living, but that it was not any kind of a guarantee that she was going to die that night. We just had to see what was going to happen, and for all we knew, she'd get better and come home. And that made me feel a lot better. That made me feel a lot better, a lot less alone, because it was scary. It was scary because here I am, I was 23, I am by myself in this hospice care center surrounded by people that I don't know, and it feels like my grandmother's literally dying right in front of me. And so, yeah, it was scary, and I felt alone, and I felt isolated. We hadn't started calling family members yet. The only person who knew at the time was my dad. And I went back in my room, and at this point, it's already like 5, 6 in the morning, and my eyes are swollen red. I am just exhausted, emotionally, mentally, just so tired. And I got on the chair and I passed out. And that whole next day, it was a bit better. She was eating a little bit at this point, which was great. But I decided that I wanted to go home, take a shower, eat, get a proper night's sleep in my own bed, because this was just, it was a lot. It was a lot to take in. And so my dad took me home that day, and she was in there from Thursday. She was there from Wednesday, and she got out, well, she came home that Saturday. So she was in there 2 nights by herself. And I remember the 2 nights that I was home alone, I kept thinking, I felt bad for not being there, because what if she woke up in the middle of the night in this in-care hospice center and she's alone and she doesn't know anyone and she's worrying about me? What if she woke up and she started freaking out because I wasn't there, because she's used to me being there? But then I reminded myself that she is literally where she needs to be. There are people there who will take care of her better than I can. So that helped, knowing that she was really where she needed to be. Um, and the other thing that really was helpful with this hospice care center and sending her there was that I got to be more of a family member than I did a caretaker. So I got to be granddaughter, not caretaker. Not that I minded being caretaker, but it gets overwhelming. Um, so, early Saturday, they bring her home, and for the first, so this was late October. It was fine all the way up until Thanksgiving. She was okay up until Thanksgiving. Um we had a family Thanksgiving and it was nice. But up until that point, I mean, her mind was slipping more and more and more. But it hadn't gotten to the point where I needed help with her or anything like that. It was more like her forgetting things here and there, and you know. But after Thanksgiving, it got really bad, and um, my dad would come over after work about 3 times a week prior to Thanksgiving. He would wake up, go to work. Right after work, he'd come over. He'd have dinner with me and my grandma, and then we'd watch a movie, and he'd help me get her to bed. Give her her medications, and we'd get her to bed, and then that was it. But as after Thanksgiving, it progressively got so much worse. The medications were not working with her, and she's the kind of woman that she does not have any sensitivities to medication. She was on morphine and it wasn't doing anything for her. So she would get really, really agitated. And at this point she would be up and walking around the house, trying to do things that at that point she just couldn't do. She was trying to cook and she couldn't cook anymore. She would repeat herself constantly. She was having past memories. She was having dreams about her dead family members, which is common among people who are getting ready to die. Um, and then it started getting kind of violent. So, what we are thinking, and this is what even the nurses were saying, was that the cancer wasn't just lung cancer anymore. We were thinking that the lung cancer probably metastasized and spread to her brain because she was having extreme personality changes, and I mean extreme. My grandma, from what I remember before she got extremely sick, she was the sweetest, most understanding woman, patient, loving. I loved her so much, and I did even when she was getting bad. But so but after this personality change in her brain, she would have moments where she'd get very combative, very violent. Um, I would say a month prior to her death, even a month and a half, 2 months prior to her death, she would call me names. She would call me idiot, moron. She'd say I was stupid. She'd say that I was poisoning her. She didn't trust me giving her her medication. She was telling family and the nurses that I abused her and she had the bruises to prove it. Which obviously my dad and I took her to the side and said, that's not true. I would never, ever, ever hit her. And she needed to stop telling people that because that could get me in a ton of trouble. And she quickly agreed and said, oh, yeah, you're right. So there was that. There was one morning that I woke up and she was lighting napkins on fire. And when I tried to bring up to her that could start the house on fire and that could possibly hurt me and her, she would say she didn't care. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She said, at first she said she wanted to burn the house down, but that wasn't what she wanted at all. That was not, she was just being very she just wasn't there. She just was not there. So she didn't know what she was saying, obviously. What really happened was she was trying to light a cigarette because she's a lifetime smoker, and she smoked up until the time she died. So she was trying to light a cigarette. She couldn't hold the thing down to keep the flame up, so she lit a napkin on fire to light her cigarette, and she was taking it to the sink to put it out when I came in and took the lighter from her. And so there was that. There were a lot of nights, like I said, about a month and a half, 2 months prior to her death, there were nights where I would stay up all night to make sure that she was in bed and that she was okay, because she would wake up in the middle of the night, and instead of it being midnight, she would think it was like 6 or 7 in the morning, and she'd get up and she'd try to get dressed, and she would try to like make breakfast and things like that, and I'd have to tell her, Grandma, it's not 6 in the morning, Grandma, it's midnight. And I'd have to help her put her pajamas back on and get her back into bed. The medications, like I said, were having no effect on her. We talked to the nurses several times and told them, and they just said, well, this is what happens at the end. You just have to ride it out because it's not going to be very long. So my dad and I partnered together and said, okay. So there reached a certain point where I had to call my dad, because I was still working at this point and I had been calling in a lot. So I had to call my dad and tell him, I need your help with her. She's just not there, and she's acting very childish, and I know it's the cancer getting to her brain, but I need help. I need help. I can't do this by myself anymore. So he quit his job that he had at the time, and he would wake up in the morning and he would come over and he'd spend the whole day with me and my grandma helping. He'd help me cook dinner. He'd give me a break. He'd tell me to go take a nap or something, because like I said, I was up all night making sure that she was in bed and that she stayed asleep. And on top of it, I had medications to give her at like midnight, 3 in the morning, 6 in the morning. Like, I had to be up periodically to give her medications. So he would, tell me to go take a nap. He would tell me to go get out of the house, go for a walk, whatever. And that was amazing help. So he would come and do that for a while. And like I said, I was calling into work a lot. And then the last day of her walking, I woke up that morning and I went into her room and I got her up and I got her dressed and I said, okay, Grandma, let's go in the living room. And she had gotten to the point where she could not walk. Her legs were dragging behind her and she was dead weight and she was really, really heavy. And I literally had my arms like this and she's facing me, leaning on me, and I'm having to pull and drag her. So I get her to the couch and I laid her down on the couch, and at that point she became in a comatose state. From that moment on, she didn't eat, she didn't drink, she just laid there, almost like she was asleep. And so my dad and I pulled the family together, and my dad said, look, this is it, this is the end. We need to keep her comfortable, we need to make sure she knows she's loved, and that when God calls for her and wants her to go home, that she knows it's okay to go. Because everyone at a certain point in time, when it's their time to go, subconsciously or not, they try to fight it. And my grandmother had been trying to fight it, whether she wanted to or not. So, my dad said, we need to make sure that she knows it's okay to go when it's time. When God calls for her, she can go. But in the meantime, we need to keep her comfortable and let her know she's loved. And we all pulled together and said, okay. So we called a nurse. The nurse came, checked her out, and said, yep, it's getting really, really close. She's in that catatonic state. I can't speak. Anyway, she's not eating, she's not drinking, she can't walk. Her eyes are closed, but not all the way, because that's another sign of how you can tell when someone's getting close. Their eyes will close, but their lids will not close all the way. So she was on the couch for about a week, and during this time, I was again up periodically giving her medications, but she could not take pills anymore. So we had to give her liquid medication. And the thing with liquid medication is that the pills that she was on were extended release, meaning she would take them and they would release in her body slowly, periodically, so that when she needed it, it would get released into the body. But she couldn't take pills, so she was on liquid. So I had to give her more liquid, more. So I would have to give her, I don't even remember now. I think it was 5 milliliters. I think I was giving her like it was 2 milliliters of like morphine, 2 milliliters of haloperidol, and these were all liquid medications. So she was on morphine, haloperidol, and just a whole bunch of other liquid medications that I had to give to her in syringes. And I'd have to put them in her mouth and I'd have to squeeze under her tongue. So when someone's like that and you have to give them medication, you fill the syringe up to however much you're supposed to give to them. You have to put it either in their cheek or under their tongue, and you have to push the plunger down really slowly so that they don't choke on it, because she choked on her medication several times. So then after I'd give her medication, I'd give her a little syringe of water and to kind of clean out her mouth. And at that time, the nurses had brought us mouth sponges. So we were able to give her a little bit of water. So we'd wet down her lips. We would give her a little bit of water, kind of clean her teeth, clean her tongue, make it a little more comfortable for her. And so during this time, I also happened to come down with another sinus infection. And this was a very severe sinus infection. So during the next couple of days, I laid on the couch. I'd lay on the big couch and I'd lay on the small couch and she'd lay on the bigger couch. And, so I was sleeping a lot because I was really sick. And also I think a lot of it had to do with the depression, just watching your loved one wither away right in front of your eyes. Was just so incredibly sad. And like I said, this woman, I remembered her from when I was little, and she was, at least in my eyes, she was so big and so strong, and she would clean and take care of her family, and she was working, and she paid the bills, and just, she was an amazing woman. And to just watch her wither into a skeleton laying on the couch that's not even moving anymore was just so heartbreaking. And I know towards the end, before she went into the comatose-like state, she hated it. She'd get so mad at herself for not being able to get up and do things, and she'd constantly say how stupid she was. And it broke my heart. So I think a lot of it had to do with depression too. And I would lay there. And for 2-3 days, I laid there. So she went into her comatose-like state, probably a little after New Year's. It was the 2nd or 3rd of January that she went into this state. So it was about a week and a half. About a week and a half went by of her being in this state, and I had been sick for weeks at this point, just laying on the couch sleeping. We had family members come because we finally made the calls and told them, it's getting close, you need to come and say your final goodbyes. And so we had family members coming, and a lot of people, and it was really, but made it through. And then it was the night of the 11th of January of this year. My dad had come over to make me soup because I was still extremely sick. I had just gotten over 2 days straight of extreme body aches and an extreme headache that just kept me literally immobilized on the couch for 2 days straight. That's how much pain I was in. So my dad came over to make me soup, and he made me chicken noodle soup. And I was sitting in the kitchen, and I finished my soup. And I went in the living room, and my dad went and sat in his rocking chair, and I went and I laid on the couch, and I was watching TV for a minute, and I glanced over at the couch at my grandma. She had been laying on her side because When people get like that, when they're bedridden or wherever they are, you have to move them so they don't get bed sores. You have to reposition them every so often. And so the nurse had just come that day and tilted her on the side towards the wall. But I looked over, and normally I could tell when she was breathing because her shoulders would move. But that day, she had been having really shallow, fast breaths, which is a telltale sign, but I was so sick I didn't recognize it. But I look over to her, and I said, "Dad, is Grandma still breathing?" And he says, "I don't know, go check her pulse." So I stand up, I grab her wrist, go to check her pulse, and it was really slow, and then I just felt it stop. And I said, "Dad, she's gone." And he came over and he checked too, and he says, "Yep." And we decided to wait until the next day to call hospice to come pick up her body, because we wanted to give family members time to come and say their goodbyes. So we waited until the next day. And as much as a relief as it was, because she wanted to go and she died at home, which is all she wanted, it was still really sad because her home that she lived there since the early 60s. That was the family home that my dad and his siblings grew up in. That was the home that me and my sister and my cousins basically grew up in. That was the family home. And I knew deep down inside of me that now that she's gone, everything was going to be gone, and that part of my life was going to be over. And it did really increase my anxiety and my depression. And that's where I've been these last couple of months, just trying to deal with the anxiety and the depression of it all. I still have nights where I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I'm still at home taking care of her and thinking I need to go check on her. I go to the store. My dad and I used to do store runs for my grandma where he'd take me to Walmart and we would get our groceries and things that I needed for me and my grandma. And my dad and I still go to the store to this day and think, okay, what does grandma need? And then we go, oh, that's right. She's not here anymore. It's just, I'm relieved because she was extremely sick and she didn't want to get that bad, but it just kind of happened. But it was just so extremely sad. And I don't mean for this video to be a bummer, but this is my story. This is what happened. This is how I felt. And I realize these videos may not be for everyone, but hey. So there was a lot of being overwhelmed. There was a lot of, like I said, anxiety, a lot of just being sad, depression. It really just took a huge emotional toll out on me. It shook up my whole entire world. I do have to say it made my faith stronger, because when I would go through those hard times, I was able to pray, and I would have to say that yes, it did bring me closer to God, and God helped me tremendously through it all. There were times when I was going through all of this, my dad was there, but I felt ashamed to tell my other family members what was going on with my grandma, because I didn't want them to see her that way. She didn't want them to see her that way. And she made it perfectly clear that she did not want the family called until it was the last minute. But there were a lot of feelings of being ashamed, and just wanting to hide. So there was that. And so as far as the lessons that I learned through being a caregiver for my grandmother was, one, and I didn't really touch on this a lot in this whole video, but one, there's always going to be people who are criticizing you as a caregiver. There were a lot of people over this course of taking care of my grandma that told me that I was giving her too much medication or that she was on too much medication when I was doing exactly what the nurses and the doctors were telling me to do. They were telling me that I wasn't taking, I had people telling me that I wasn't taking very good care of her, which I was doing the best I could. I was a 23-year-old woman who's also trying to get her life together, who's trying to save money, who's trying to work, who's trying to get through school, who's trying to figure out her life. And I'm also taking care of my dying grandmother and seeing her withering and fading away right in front of my eyes. It was a lot. So you're going to have a lot of people who criticize you for the way you take care of your loved one or your friend or whoever. Don't listen to them and just know that you're doing the best that you can. The other thing is, yes, it's going to get overwhelming. You are going to get overwhelmed. And I had people telling me, specifically the nurses were telling me, you need to take breaks. You need to go take some time for you. You need to go eat something. You need to go sleep. And I just was so overwhelmed and tired and just wanted to make sure my grandma was okay that no, during that whole entire period of time, I did not take care of myself. I did not. I would sometimes have to go. I think there was one point where I had to go like 4 or 5 days without taking a shower because my grandma wouldn't let me take a shower. I took a shower and she'd yell at me. And again, that was the cancer. That was not her. I realized that. I recognized that. But, I realized that I did not take care of myself at all. And it took its toll. And it's still taking its toll because there are still some habits that I have now that I am having a hard time breaking, like staying up all night. There's no reason for me to stay up all night now. But there's something in my brain telling me you need to stay up. You need to stay up. So it's going to be overwhelming, but just know that it's okay. It's okay to reach out for help. It's okay to ask people for help if you need it. And just know that you can take time for yourself and you will be okay. Which brings me to another point. Like I said, during this whole entire time I was going through this, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to tell anyone. I wanted to be able to take care of her myself. And that's why it was even hard telling my dad that I needed help and him quitting his job to come and help me. I wanted to do this myself because she didn't want anyone seeing her like that, and I didn't want anyone seeing her like that. So it made me feel really alone and really isolated. Just know that you are not alone. And like I said in the second lesson that I learned, reach out for help if you need it. Call someone, talk to someone, whatever you have to do, but just know that you're not alone and you have nothing to be shamed about. So that's my story. Those are the lessons that I learned. I'm still trying to get used to my life pre or post grandmother, post caregiver. I'm still trying to get my life back together and figure out what to do now. I feel like I've been floating in limbo since my grandmother got sick in October to now, and this is early April. Still trying to figure out my life, what I'm gonna do. Right now, things are better than they were, but some things are still falling apart. But it's okay. I and my family will continue to pick ourselves up, and we will make it, and we will be okay. To anyone out there who is a caregiver, to a friend, a family member, whoever, you are so strong, and I have so much respect for you. Keep doing what you do. And the last note is to all of the nurses and the CNAs and the people who helped me with my grandmother, who came and helped me with her prescriptions, who came when she was really sick and needed to be transported and really needed care, who noticed that I was overwhelmed and I needed help. Thank you so much. I know if my grandma were alive right now, she'd want me to thank you as well. And just in general, to all of the nurses, to all of the doctors, to all of the CNAs, to all of the people in the medical field who help people day after day. Just thank you so much for all you do. I know, like I said, as someone who was a caregiver, it means so much to have people like you there to let us know that we're not alone and we do have help. So quick shout out to Denver Hospice. You guys were amazing. You helped me and my grandmother so much. I could not have done it without help from you guys, and my family, and my friends. And you know who you are when I say that. You know who you are. Thank you so much for being there for me. This has been the hardest, literally the hardest, I want to say 6 months to a year of my life. It has been extremely hard. It has completely and utterly changed me as a person. I had to quit my job. I'm currently looking for a job. But I will make it and I will be okay. So that's my story, and those are the lessons that I've learned. I hope someone can get help from this. And thank you for watching. Have a good night or a day or wherever you are, and maybe I'll see you in another video I make.